that if you take the sociological journey, you're agreeing to have a life that's a tapestry. And it might be scary, but it's never boring and it's creative and it's been a joy.
Well, welcome to the Open Notes podcast. Our study group includes me, Angela Thompson, Nora Mortimer. Hi, Nora. Kiana Gerhardt.
Hello.
And our guest today is TCU Professor of Sociology and Department Chair, Dr. Carol Thompson. Hi, Carol.
Hi.
Well, okay, y'all, grab a snack and your notebook. Let's get ready to study. So the first question is always an icebreaker one, Carol. So can you introduce yourself and tell us where you are from?
Yes, Carol Thompson. And I am actually I was born in Texas and I'm originally from here, where we're filming here. But I grew up in New Orleans. So very different than Texas, than this area. And then when I graduated from school, 3 degrees at LSU, I took off for the big wide world and ended up in Texas eventually again. And now I've been in Texas 32 additional years, maybe even 33. So that's where I'm from.
All right, did you go to LSU?
I went to LSU for 1 year before the pandemic, and then I switched to UNT just because it was closer and cheaper during some unstable times, but I loved the campus. And I actually did want to ask you, why 3 degrees at the same university? Usually the advice is go different, try different universities.
Yeah, I'm a first gen PhD and I was first gen sort of student, and I will say my mother was going to college at the same time, so I don't always know what to call that, but the unfamiliarity with the informal rules of social life in the academy, I didn't really understand the value of having degrees from different places. And I really am fortunate because I went to a very large program. I was in a very large sociology program. And so there were, 30 faculty, big department. So I didn't have a problem with having a lot of repeat ideologies and perspectives and courses. I had a lot of diversity in my coursework. But the fear for some folks when they do multiple degrees at one place is that you won't get the breadth of education that you actually need to do the job that you eventually will do. And I also had no idea I was going to become a professor because I didn't know what the world would hold. So I always think I was local. And then I was married and I was landlocked in a relationship. But let me just say, you might have seen my screen do a little wobble. There's a cat rubbing on my screen, and you will maybe see her here in a bit. So don't get alarmed if you see a tail flipping in front of the screen. But thanks for asking, because I think students sometimes don't understand why people are like, oh, you don't really want to go to the same school. And it really isn't. I think some people might think it's elitism. It isn't. It's about the breadth and the totality of the educational experience. And I think I overcame that greatly. And maybe that'll come up later, how I think I overcame the sort of 3 degrees in one place question.
Well, that's actually a really good point, because even though my parents had bachelor's and master's, nobody had a doctorate before in my family, and nobody advised me to go to different places, so I'm living here, I'll go to school here,
Right.
and so it's really important. I think people have that mentoring to help people make different choices, because I didn't know I could make a different choice. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I got in here, I guess I'll go here.
That's exactly it. And also, a lot of times when you don't know what your career goals are necessarily, but you're just in love with learning, and you know that you are just broadly interested and will hopefully have a degree that is somehow connected to intellectual life. You don't know You don't know what you don't know.
Mhm.
And so that's another thing that students, and I think we're in a better shape now than we were when I was in school.
Mhm.
Because I think people know, oh, we need to reach out to students. We need to actually articulate things that have been heretofore unarticulated.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
somebody, if you go to a professor now and you say, I'm thinking about a PhD, what should I do? They would say, well, here's what you should do. You should
Mhm.
try to go apply to different schools and
Mhm.
go visit them and see
Mhm.
what fits you. And so anyway, that's my advice to students anyway.
Well, you mentioned the possibility of a cat tail going across the screen. Can you tell us a little bit about your Zoom background and the picture you chose?
Yes. This is a cat, Rocky, and my life partner uh, is an artist. Well, he's not an artist by trade. He's a sociologist, but he paints pictures. And we are both first gen, and we didn't have a lot of money when we started out, and we love art, and we couldn't afford art. And he said, "I'm gonna start painting art for us." So we have all of our animals' heads painted. And so this is Rocky, our first cat together. And it's called Rocky in the Mind's Eye because he'd already left our planet at this point. And so he painted him from a picture, but he wanted him ethereally present in the room. And so this is Rocky in the Mind's Eye.
That's
And we have Jack in the Mind's Eye in the hallway.
That is
So that's it.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Kiana, what about your background? Continuing on the cat theme.
Yes,
Yeah, I saw while researching for this interview, I saw that you had a lot of relationships with cats.
I do.
So, I have cats myself, so I decided, you know what, I'm gonna represent them through this background. So that's why I chose my cats and paws.
Thanks. It's great. Hopefully you'll see a cat here. I don't know. She's being finicky this morning. We'll see if she'll show up.
I just kind of have a generic bookcase. My favorite author just released a new book, so I'm going to do that as soon as I get away from packing. I'm in the middle of moving, so I'm kind of like preparing myself to be nice, relaxing in a library. But I can hear my cat also at the door scratching. I think we all have cats, so yeah. Well, not
Unfortunately, no,
anymore.
not anymore.
Yeah,
No.
passed
Yeah,
away.
mine passed away. We're now on to two dogs.
Hmm.
A puppy that is not quite two, but is a mastiff, so 120-pound puppy. And a German Shepherd who is, I think she's probably 9 months old. So in that destructive puppy phase. So I got a house full of furry children right now.
Yeah,
Um, uh,
yeah.
but this background, I'm actually visiting my parents who are in the process of moving. And so it's just, I wanted something felt cozy and not stressed with boxes. So there you go. There you go. Let's see. So, Carol, tell us about your journey to teaching in general and sociology in specific. You said initially you weren't sure the direction you were going to go to. How'd you
Yeah.
end up doing what you're doing?
Just for students or anyone who is, unsure about who they are, I am fortunate, and it's a trait I guess I didn't know I had until, it started appearing. And that is I am broadly curious about pretty much anything. Somebody can start talking about garage door openers, and I'm actually kind of interested in the way they work. I'm just a very broadly interested person. So I was a little bit rudderless because I would love every course, every conversation, everything I learned in college. I actually very rarely would come across something that wasn't at least interesting to me. A little bit, and I can make it interesting. And I did not know that that was a trait that was actually going to be serving me well, but it did lead me around a lot of uncertainty as an undergraduate for sure, because I had, and I ended up in sociology, which is, I think, the queen sciences for people who are broadly interested in everything human and social. So that's why I would tell students, if you are just a curious person and you want to learn a lot of skills that are broad about social and cultural life, sociology is an amazing head start, So then, as you would guess, there were some courses that were a little more glamorous than others, and one was a course called Deviance and Social Control. And I'm not that, because I'm not that traditional, and so that course was like, wow, people research this sort of thing. Wow, it's unbelievable. I want to do that. And even at that was the first thought. It's like, oh, I want to research deviance, and that's where I think a lot of students are like, oh, I want to do the glamour. I want to be crime scene investigator. I want to do the, you get that first sort of just like, woo, this is a direction. And so I started moving in that direction and met professors who were doing research in that area. This is where, who teaches you really matters. And so the people that I was introduced to and took courses from studied crime. And so I was trained as a criminologist in the first part of my intellectual journey and when I went on for a master's. Um, and I thought I worked in prisons as a part of research groups, both psych testing. I would go out to I've been in almost every prison in Louisiana, in fact, and met with inmates, really got a great insight into young offenders, how, they are like any young adults. They're not different, So it was this amazing adventure in that area. And so I didn't know if I was going to be, oh, am I going to go towards social psychology? Am I going to, who knew? But I was actually also broadly able to do all kinds of things. So I can do math, and evidently that's a good thing. I hate math, but I can do it. And so when you're in graduate school and you can do math, people are like, oh, you really should practice that and do that and become that kind of a sociologist. Turns out that's a great thing to become. I became a quantitative criminologist, which means that I was mostly data driven. And so it also then is good to be interested in anything and everything, because you can be interested in things that are abstract that you can't see, like big data. So I was doing big data before it was called big data. So I looked at the national crime victimization surveys. I worked in prisons, and but then I just started coming back home. And so 2 times in my life, it was pivotal to center myself and kind of sit with it and go, what do you want to do? You can do you can do almost any direction here. And I realized I was interested in understanding why people use guns and why people are willing to kill other people to protect property. And that was always just a really bizarre thing to me. So from the very beginning, um, I sort of went in and then came out and I became a person who looked at social issues like gun ownership, capital punishment, race and capital punishment, gender and crime, rape and crime, all these things. And I was very satisfied with that for a long time. So I became a criminologist, but I have a PhD in sociology, because even then it was real clear that I was interested in the fundamental mechanisms of behavior in social life, not just in the issue. And I didn't really want to work in policy. I wanted to understand social life and human behavior and culture. So that's the foray. And then the second, how did I become then from that a human animal studies scholar, which is what I am now, is that after tenure, which is long story short, right? I spent my time in the academy proving that I could do the research and publish the publications that needed to be published for the, ran the gauntlet and did some administrative work. And then again, a moment of clarity. I needed a moment to center, and I hired a life coach, which I was an early adopter of the life coach sort of method of finding yourself. And so I got a life coach, and we went through all these exercises, and I realized that my future was in truing some pretty important values with what I do from here on out, including teaching and my research. And I decided that I love nature, I love animals, and I love the relationships that human beings have with nature and other animals and other people through nature and other animals. And so I shifted my career just that moment. And for the last 20 years, I've been a human animal study scholar, and it's been amazing. And it would surprise you, or maybe not surprise you, to know that a lot of my criminology and my legal social control background is absolutely coming into play every single day in human animal studies. So it all came together, and I feel like it's a tapestry. And I feel like that if you take the sociological journey, you're agreeing to have a life that's a tapestry. And it might be scary, but it's never boring, and it's creative, and it's been a joy.
I love what you said there, that your life is a tapestry. It really like puts into perspective like all of your life experiences and puts them in one place. And tapestries have so much color. So it was
Yeah.
such a nice way to put it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I recently wrote a blog for our In the News website about service and emotional support animals. And while researching for that, there was a lot of resistance to like support animals. Can you offer any insight as to why there's still so much resistance?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because my new area of research is the impacts on well-being and health that interactions, like encounters with animals, and mostly non-domestic animals, because have on aging adults. Because aging adults cannot often have a domestic, a companion animal because of trip hazards, or usually it's the facilities that don't allow pets. And so that's my new area of research. But for the last 10 years, that has been something I have noticed. And I think we did go through in the beginning a sort of a period in the United States anyway, where service animals and emotional support animals were being embraced. And then sort of this reality that animals are not tidy, like that people are. We're not really tidy either. If you ever seen a plane when people get off after a long haul flight, we are not tidy. And so I think that resistance came with this mass adoption of it as a mode of mental health, as a kind of a therapy. And I think that we're in a stage perhaps of trying to figure out the contours of what that's supposed or should look like, because the research is very clear, and that is emotional support animals are every bit as important as service animals for augmenting and facilitating the health and well-being of their humans. And so we know that is clear, and it is especially critical with veterans and people who suffer from debilitating anxiety and even PTSD. And so I think the resistance has a lot to do, fortunately, unfortunately, with the fact that we live in a very consumer-driven, individualistic society, where when people think about what their experience in any given context can be, it is not a social experience. They do not think and put themselves into the role of the other easily. They can, but it's almost as if that is held back their humanness in like travel or their humanness in a store is sort of blocked from their access because of this emphasis on I need to be able to do what I need to do fast and not being interrupted. And I don't want to have to smell something or see something that isn't, whatever. And I could get even weirder cultural, cultural studies and say it's some weird purity stuff in our culture, cleanliness is next to godliness. The whole Weberian, Max Weber's whole, like Protestantism has had, even if you're not a Protestant, it's had such an impact on our culture. There is some of that. And I think that's especially going on in nursing homes and in care homes. We call them nursing homes, they're not really, but care homes and assistance facilities where a person's in progressive care. They're getting increasingly intolerant of support animals, which is so unfortunate. And the excuse, of course, is zoonotic disease and cleanliness, but those things are present all over the place. If you have a companion animal, you have a risk for zoonotic disease too. People don't know about that, but anyway, I hope that answers it to at least some extent. But I think the research, and as we have an aging population, I think that this desire to have assistance animals is going to only increase. And I think we're going to get back to a place where they're more accepted and maybe there's some ground rules, some social control, ground rules for it. But I do want to distinguish between a service animal and an emotional support animal, because the service animal, and y'all know this because you're prepared for the podcast, is a service animal is legally allowed to be wherever they want to be with their human. And people don't know that either. And sometimes they break the law by insisting knowing why the dog is, and is that dog a service animal? I mean, and in Texas, it's pretty clear. You don't really have the right to ask people what the dog is doing there. If that dog has a service vest on, if that dog is a service animal registered, they can be with their human in those environments. Emotional support animals don't hold that legal status, but they can go in some places with their humans, and in places that are tolerant of it, like Home Depot or Lowe's or those sorts of, places. Those big package stores, the big box stores, they can go there. But they can't be in, for example, places like, restaurants, which is kind of unfortunate, because they're equally needed for that person to have a smooth social interaction. So I can go on all day with that, but hopefully that shed some light. But I do think it has to do, the resistance has to do with just a basic tendency to be just so focused on means and ends. I got to be here. I need to do this. I don't have time for that. And that is ugly, or that is stinky, or that is, yeah. So that's my simple answer.
And that's so important. In helping my parents move, they're looking at an active senior living communities. And one of the places that we visited, people had pets and were allowed to have their pets. And, we saw a couple little old men who were taking their dogs out, and one had a pretty big dog, and the happiness of the place was so different than some of the other places that were, a little too sterile,
Yeah.
a little too perfect. As a big animal person, I know the periods in my life when I haven't had a companion animal have been pretty sad times. And I feel like, okay, I'll tell my husband, we need somebody. Let's find somebody. And the transition from when we lost our cat to when we got the puppies, that was really a hard time, because I need to have them around me. They are a very kind of grounding force to me. And to be a senior and not be able to have that grounding force would be, I think, a very difficult space, at least for me to be in.
And
Yeah.
and just to follow up, there are socioeconomic, sort of such differences in people and in our population. And increasingly, the aging population is going to be poorer. And so you have the majority of people over the age of 65, which is we're starting to be a super aging society, which means we have a huge percentage of people in those age categories, and they don't have money. And so sometimes they will be living in facilities that have a high level of control over their life. And I recently have been, this is an area of research for me now. And so I'm reading everything I can get my hands on. And there's a really lovely piece of research out of South Africa that details, it's an ethnography of a care home of the author's grandmother. And they document how animated, engaged, and lovely the experiences with visiting animals had on the care home residents. And for the care unit residents, the dogs that would visit would help them connect memories that they hadn't been able to have access to for years. And they would see the dog, have an interaction with the dog, and they would look at their son or daughter and go, "Do you remember Sparky?" And suddenly there's like a memory, and the adult child is cherishing what has been the only connection for 2 weeks to the past. So these are not just, it's wonderful for the older person, but it's wonderful connection, and it's memory retrieving, because animals reside in a non-verbal part of our memory. They're in a sensory part of our minds, and we access memories about them through touch and through smell and through, just overall body experience. So it's a corporeal memory, and that then allows them to access these social memories with their children. And it's beautiful. And when somebody sees that, and then they could say, "No, we're not going to have visitation animals here," it's almost a crime. Because those are special moments that family is going to have as a result of this facilitation. And that's why we know that dogs dogs especially, and I will say the vast majority of research is on dog-human companionship, but the vast majority of that research definitely confirms that there's this triangulation between the animal and people, and it connects them in this really strong relationship. So, well, it's wonderful.
Interesting. There's a lot of, it's not research, but there is this new medical device that looks like an AI or artificial dog called, I think, Paro or Parvo. So do you think AI and technology like that could replace an actual physical dog or cat or any other kind of animal?
Yeah, I don't think it will replace, but I think it can be a great proxy. And I would just refer you to an old movie, Castaway, with Tom Hanks, and he falls in love with a ball. He loves this ball because it's his only companion. He talks to it. So he creates a virtual human out of this ball. So as humans, we're a phenomenal species. We're also a pretty destructive species, but we are an incredible species at creating meaning. But we also create personhood. That is like a social construction. Personhood does not exist. We bring it, we talk it into, we relate it into being. And I do think if you've ever had a Beanie Baby or a plushie toy, there is a tendency, I mean, it approximates, dolls. Those are human toys because they stand in for humans, and they work. I mean, and they don't work perfectly, but they can teach children empathy. You can push your baby doll, or you can take care of your little puppy or your little jelly cat. You can do a lot of things, but it's not exactly the same. And so, for example, Zoom is better than no interaction or than a phone call, but it's not better than face-to-face interaction. So yes, I think AI, though, for senior living facilities has a potential to really, I think in some ways, create a little subculture of care for those folks. There was in the study, the same study about the South African care home, there was a woman that was documented, and she collected little fuzzy toys of animals because she had been such an animal lover her whole life, and she couldn't have animals there. And so people would they knew how much she loved animals, and they would bring her little toys, and she had them up on shelves in her room. And it brought her great joy to show people her doggies and her kitties. And so, yeah, I think we as human beings can approximate, and AI will really help with that. And the more lifelike, the better. So, I'm not against that. But we manage them. They're healthy. We're trying to wrangle a sick cat right now that's an interloper, has come in and decided it wants to bully some other cats and be a part of our group. And we're like, hey, we only have one rule around here. If you're part of this group, you're fixed. And so we're wrangling that and we call that cat Grumpy.